This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm HELLHOUND, and it's Monday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. I've been doing this series for a long time now, and over the years I've looked at more than 50 creature types, and today we're doing another one with a look at dogs. The dog creature type was actually only introduced in Magic fairly recently, in Core Set 2021. However, it isn't only creatures since then that have the dog creature type, because they went back and retroactively changed the creature type of all hounds to dogs. Since the creature type was introduced, it has become quite popular, which makes sense because many people love dogs and have dogs as pets, including me and my wife. To be eligible for this list, a card had to either have the dog creature type or be capable of making a dog creature token. In all, there were 107 cards eligible for this list, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, and this includes major events like Pro Tours and set championships, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point, and this includes events like Grand Prix and Magic Online Showcase Challenges. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it is Corpse Cur. This artifact dog comes with Infect, which means he does damage to players in the form of poison counters, and damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters. The Cur has some additional Infect synergy because it also returns another Infect creature from your graveyard to your hand when it dies. Infect is of course a powerful strategy in many formats, as poison counters basically let you win the game for only doing 10 damage. That said, Corpse Cur hasn't exactly been a multi-format staple for the deck, as a 4-mana 2/2 is a pretty terrible rate. However, it has managed to pick up a couple of top 8s in the sideboard of modern Infect decks, though it doesn't have any points since 2015. This means its spot on the list is definitely in jeopardy going forward. At number 9, it is Stonebinder's Familiar. It has the same overall score as Corpse Cur, but because its 2 points come from a first tier event, I gave it the higher slot on the list. This Familiar is a pretty potent 1-drop in a deck that regularly exiles stuff, as it can end up growing pretty rapidly, at which point the 1 mana you spend on it is incredibly efficient. The Familiar has quite recently made its way into standard white weenie decks, including one that top-8'd the 2021 World Championship. These decks run several cards that exile stuff, including Sun Gold Sentinel, Portable Hole, and Elite Spellbinder, so the Familiar often ends up being much larger than a 1/1, especially if you curve out with a turn 2 Sentinel and turn 3 Spellbinder. It has only very recently started to see play in Standard, and it is a lot longer in the format, so it is pretty likely to move up this list going forward. At number 8, it is Mogus's Warhound. This 2-mana 2/2 has to attack each turn, but it also comes with the additional upside of Bestow, which means you can play it as an aura. It has some significant upside over a normal aura too, because if the creature it's attached to dies, it sticks around on the battlefield as a creature. It gained its points in standard and block aggro decks, in particular, in decks that heavily featured the heroic mechanic, since bestowing the Warhound on a heroic creature gave you some pretty serious additional value. It hasn't gained any points since rotating out of standard. At number 7, I have AINOK Survivalist. It has the same number of points as the Warhound, but I gave it the edge because it has a higher average finish. On the plane of Tarkir, there are many dog people, like the Survivalist here. The Survivalist comes with Megamorph, and when you turn it face up, it's a 3/2 that also nukes an artifact or enchantment, and that's some pretty nice utility on a card that can also just be a 2-mana 2/1 if that's what you need. In general, you actually get a pretty good deal. 5 mana for a 3/2 that naturalizes a thing is the kind of card that would find its way into sideboards in many standard formats. It was featured in the sideboard of Devotion to Green while it was in standard, but it doesn't have any points since rotating out of the format. At number 6, it is AKOUM HELLHOUND. This dog is pretty aggressive, since it comes packing Landfall, which allows it to attack as a 2/3, or even larger if you put multiple lands in play on a single turn. Unsurprisingly, it's found its way into standard red deck wins, and it is possible it gains a few more points before it rotates. At number 5, it is Wild Dogs. This is a 1-mana 2/1 that comes with a bit of downside. That might not look ultra impressive today, but back in 1999, 1-mana 2/1s were few and far between, so this ended up being a pretty nice card for green aggro decks. Plus, the downside isn't that big, as if you're the one playing the dogs, you're planning on being the beatdown, and it isn't ultra likely that your opponent will have more life than you, and if they do, you're probably losing the game anyway. The additional upside of cycling helps mitigate against the downside too, since if you draw these dogs and your opponent does have more life, you can just pitch it and try to find something else. As a result of its efficiency, it was a great one-drop for mono-green stompy decks in both block and standard. At number 4, it is Kunoros, Hound of Athreos. Kunoros is an incredibly efficient creature. A 3-mana 3/3 with Vengeance, Menace, and Lifelink is quite the deal, but it also comes with static abilities that hate on the graveyard. It prevents creature cards in the graveyard from coming to the battlefield, and it makes it so spells can't be cast from the graveyard. It's pretty nice to have such a nice hate effect on an already very efficient creature. It means you can run this in the main deck while getting some incidental hate against some decks in Game 1. In Standard, it was pretty useful against one of the most powerful cards in the format, Uro, and this led to it seeing some significant play there, primarily in Fires of Invention decks. It has also gained points in other formats and other decks too, like in Pioneer Niv Mizzet decks and Legacy Maverick. It's no longer in Standard, but the fact it's already gained points in other formats is a good sign for Kunoros going forward. At number 3, it is ISAMARU, Hound of Khanda. This dog is a 1-mana 2/2 with basically no downside, which is awesome. However, there is a little bit of a downside here, and you'll find it on the type line. It's legendary. This certainly does make ISAMARU worse in most ways. After all, if you're in an aggro deck, you usually want a critical mass of awesome 1-drops, but because ISAMARU is legendary, one has to consider whether running a full 4 of them is too many. Still, ISAMARU is small enough and dies often enough that the downside isn't massive. Most decks that have played ISAMARU over the years tend to play 3 copies at the most, but that's still a whole lot. Between 2005 and 2009, ISAMARU was one of the premier 1-drops for aggro decks in block, standard, and extended, but he doesn't have any points since 2009. At number 2, it's Selfless Savior. I expected this to easily make the list, but I was surprised to find it at number 2 when I did the research. This 1-mana 1/1 dog has the ability to give itself up to give another creature you control indestructible, and that's a pretty nice 1-drop to have in an aggro deck. It can crack in for a few damage early, and then protect a more important creature later in the game. Aggro decks hate board sweepers, but Selfless Savior makes sure you will at least have something stick around. The Savior has gained the most points in Standard, but it has already found some pretty serious multi-format success. In Pioneer, it's played in SRAM Aura decks. These are decks that are really built around auras, and the Savior is great at protecting those enchanted creatures. In Modern, it has gained points in Toolbox decks, which can search up the Savior at will, and getting it at the exact right time is pretty great. It has also seen some significant play in historic white aggro decks, though it hasn't quite managed the top 8 there. It is very likely to continue to gain points, and it may even have a shot at catching the number 1 card on this list in the future, and that card is Wild Mongrel. This probably isn't a huge surprise if you saw my recent MTG top 10 on bad cycles with good cards in them. The Mongrel is part of a cycle of dogs, but the other 4 are pretty terrible. Meanwhile, Wild Mongrel is a great 2-drop that can increase its stats by discarding cards, and it can even change its color, which doesn't come up a ton, but it is some additional upside on an already good card. You might think having to discard for the stats boost isn't ideal, but the Mongrel has always seen play in decks that can get serious value out of discarding. In Block, Standard, Extended, and Legacy, it was played alongside cards with Madness and Threshold, which made it so discarding wasn't even really a downside. It's also gained points in mono-green aggro decks and Pauper. It is likely to continue to gain points going forward, but probably not at the same rate as Selfless Savior, so it may not be able to hold on to its spot on this list. Well, those are the 10 dogs that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you want to own any of these dogs, you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each of them in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you stay aware of future MTG Top 10s and other content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past MTG Top 10s, including many more on specific creature types, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.